Good morning, everybody. Thanks a lot for being with us for what promises, I think, to probably be one of the most interesting and certainly topical panels of the day. AI and cybersecurity is on everybody's mind these days, and I'm a European correspondent for the New York Times, and certainly one of the biggest issues that we have been covering has been the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence in all of its sort of, risks and promises, as well as, the implications that it holds for cybersecurity. And one of the great things about the folks that we have on our panel today is that we've got two people from both sides of the aisle on this issue. Martin, everybody is up here on the screen. You can see their backgrounds. Martin from the European Parliament, representing government, and Evan from Microsoft, representing the private sector. Sorry? Oh, Google, excuse me. It's the cyber arms race. And, whether, it be something as basic as something that touches our lives, such as a cyber attack on an American company that has just disrupted travel at Heathrow Airport in Brussels and in Berlin, to hybrid warfare by Russia with drones circling even Denmark these days, and certainly the use of artificial intelligence for political interference and disinformation. The challenges are huge. And so I'd love to start with you, Martin, and kind of ask you to take a step back in your role as Vice President of the European Parliament and somebody who's extremely involved in these issues. You were mentioning to me that one of your favorite books is a book by one of my New York Times colleagues, Nicole Pelroth, entitled, "This is How They Tell Me the World Ends." Pretty ominous, but it talks about the risk of cyber warfare, et cetera, essentially on steroids. So let's start by, I want to ask you to sort of step back and paint for us a picture of what the world looks like today, in terms of cyber risks, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. And are we ready to really deal with those risks?
Thank you, and it's really great to be here. Now, no, we're not ready. It means that everything is horrible. No, in arms race, you're never really fully ready. And sadly, this has been an arms race. It's seriously perplexing when you realize how dependent are we on a super highly complex systems. This very conference can be actually quite easily hacked, shut down entirely. Every time you take an elevator, you have to be aware that, actually it's connected to the internet. Or most of the new elevators, not if you go for something Asian. And that's where the security is indeed something which is super important. Now, you mentioned the attack on the IT systems of several European airports. When I was flying out of Brussels, the boarding was still done in a non-ordinary way, in a kind of backup way. It's more than a week after the attack. There is a major car producer whose factories are shut down entirely because of the very recent cyber attack lasting for more of a while. But there is also a beer producer which was under the very same attack and is normally operating. The recent elections in Moldova, what is not talked about is, because everybody talked about the interference, and that's a huge issue in terms of kind of the attempt to influence it both offline with bribes and online with all the disinformation. But there's been also really substantial and quite massive attacks on the IT infrastructure around the elections, which were not successful because this is something which was taken seriously. So while admitting that it's never going to be 100%, the very first thing that you need to do is admit that you have a problem. That's, the basic of dealing with any problem is admitting that you have it and starting to deal with it. Dealing with it involving all the different stakeholders. It's not that we agree on everything, but if we don't talk and not try to figure it out together, we are in a bigger problem. So I think this is the second thing is really collaboration and trying to address these problems because they're just getting bigger.
Right. Evan, I see you nodding your head over there. I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges? I mean, Google is one of the companies that's certainly at the cutting edge of developing AI, which, as we know, can be a double-edged sword. You know, what is a company like Google doing to address these issues that Martin just raised?
Yeah, first I would say, to Martin's point, I was hoping for some disagreement here, but I have to violently agree. We'll get there. I have to I mean, we agree on the socks, clearly. We've got the colorful socks memo. But, you know, cybercrime is a huge industry. It's a $10 trillion industry globally. Cybercrime is about the same size as construction, the global construction industry, or the global healthcare industry. So we're not talking about seasonal campaigns. We're not talking about teenagers in basements anymore. We're not talking about attacks on government or military infrastructure anymore. We're talking about essentially persistent, universal cyber warfare. We're already in the era of just persistent cyber attacks. And so, the first thing that we have to do is to recognize that and to behave as if that's the case. Then with AI in the picture, to your point, Liz, first we have to make sure that we're securing the AI itself. If you fast forward to a world where AI is even more powerful than today, we have to make sure that AI is secure from cyber attack itself. Then we have to mitigate the risks of AI being used for cyber attacks. Deepfakes is a classic example of how AI is being used by bad actors, but it's not the only way. We also see AI being used to accelerate classic cyber attacks, exploitation of software vulnerabilities, for example. And I think at some point we're going to see agentic hackers emerge. So how are we as the Western world, how are we as the technology industry, how are we as Google going to get ready for that and use AI to drive greater safety, first to mitigate those threats, but also to drive greater safety for the world, to eliminate software vulnerabilities, to eliminate social engineering, to ultimately lead to a safer world despite all those risks. That's our top priority right now.
So, but how does a company like Google, though, protect against some of the very risks that you just described? I mean, as a private company, obviously there's also an arms race going on around the world between and among companies, between and among countries. And in the case of a company like Google, I mean, you also have, a bottom line imperative. And so how are you balancing that with the essentially ethical need to root out, to make sure that the technology that you're developing isn't being used for nefarious purposes? Or do you have any responsibility in that regard? We
have a huge amount of responsibility, and we take it very seriously. In the context of AI specifically, we developed the secure AI framework. It's called SAFE, which we've made available outside of Google through a coalition called COSI. It's a coalition with other players in the technology industry. By the way, we don't see security as a competitive field. We see security as something that's good for everyone. It's good for Google. There's no future in which Google is secure and Microsoft is not, to pick on your example, and we're happy about that. We're not happy about that. We want everybody to be secure. So we build things internally. We make them available externally. We're investing heavily in the space. And we have principles that we use for agentic development. We have principles that we use for AI products. We incorporate security by design into the products. And of course, we block and tackle the daily stream of actual attacks and threats out there. I can talk about any of that if you want in more detail, but we do everything from the very tactical responsive all the way to the very strategic. And our philosophy is to export that security outside of Google and try and make everybody secure.
I mean, Martin, from your perspective, is that enough?
No, and my worry is that we cannot rely on the companies here. Because, of course, it is in your interest as a corporation to make sure that your products work safely for you and your customers. There's no question about it. But I want to touch one important element which is really important for the AI, and that's the ethics of it. And ethics and security go hand in hand together. And this is where, I have to say I'm not really believing that this is something where we can rely on companies to be correct. One thing is obviously the example of Grok and the Grok manipulation. What guarantees are there, aside of potentially legislative ones, which actually also need to be enforced? That's nice to have a legislation. It needs to be enforced equally. To stop anyone, including you guys or just anyone else, from manipulating the AI models in a certain direction. Nothing. And honestly, your objective and the fiduciary duty of your management and leadership is to maximize the shareholder value. The more time people spend on a platform, the more ad revenue is, the higher shareholder value. If it is the fake news that's driving it, and that's what we see out there, that's what we've seen regularly, even on a YouTube, it's basically the algorithms are being constantly trained, and now increasingly with AI, to push fake news, to push the most outrageous things, because it generates profit. And I think this is where we have the legislative need and challenge, and ultimately, in the age of AI, to need our own European AI, strong AI environment with our own AI models, because that's something where we can work hard to base it on our values that we cherish and not to be dependent on other motivations that are out there. Because, it's not criticism, it's just something which is legitimate, that the motivation is increasing shareholder value. And within the limits of the law, anything is done to increase the shareholder value. If it brings down the society, it's shareholder value is the objective.
There's no shareholder value if there's no society, if there's no Western society. But listen, I would say a couple of things. I fully agree that it's not up to companies like Google, and it shouldn't be up to companies like Google, to decide on the ethics of AI. That would be wrong. We can't do that. We don't have the authority, the power to do that. We don't know where the line should be drawn. We shouldn't define that line. We shouldn't draw that line. Society should draw that line. Lawmakers, universities, the actual behavior of users. Society should draw the line, and we should be responsible for enforcing that line. But we should not be responsible for drawing the line. We've tried that before. That was not the right answer, right? We should not be drawing the line. We're doing a number of things to help enforce the drawing of that line once it's drawn or as it's being drawn. There's a coalition called C2PA that focuses on content provenance. If you take a video, and the device that you're using implements C2PA, as Google Pixel does, for example, that video is stamped with a digital watermark that proves that that was shot by a camera. And as that video is propagated around social media and so on, to use your example, Martin, you can know with certainty that that video was shot by a camera, not by an AI. It was not made by an AI, and vice versa. So there are a number of efforts like that. None of those efforts is a silver bullet. It's a very complicated set of issues. But our focus is to enable the enforcement of that ethical line, not the drawing of the ethical line.
I mean, is that from the perspective of regulators, how valid of a position is that? It's almost a little bit like saying you could argue that the creator of Frankenstein has no responsibility for the creature that he created. I mean, we've heard so much talk in recent years about the need for guardrails. But from the industry's perspective, there's also plenty of arguments against. So where are we on this issue right now? And has it become even more imperative as AI has just grown, in leaps and bounds, and the double-edged nature of it becomes more and more apparent?
And I'm concerned it's going to be increasingly hard because, you can agree or disagree with Ray Kurzweil and the whole singularity thing, but the pace is definitely increasing, which in a proper legislative process, deliberative legislative process, but that takes time. That's one of the strong suits of democracy, but let's be honest, also can be perceived in weakness that, you just don't dictate things. That's where I think what we need to address is how do we ultimately legislate these things? Not reacting to what's now out there, but really having the big long-term vision. Now, Isaac Asimov came out with the laws of robotics years ago. And they're fundamentally really, really simple. And now, if you would try to address the current challenges, you would end up in a complicated details, but unless you have the strong, fundamentally value-based vision of this is what is important for the society, these are the freedoms, this is, the human agency that's, I believe, under threat from the AI, because unless you actually train your brain gets biologically weaker and not capable of doing things, and by replacing a number of the tasks where you train your brain by AI, we're losing agency. Unless we build in the safeguards in the society, not ultimately only about kind of regulating everything, but really strengthening the fundamentals, keeping the vision. This is the best guardrail, if it's embedded in the society.
Yeah.
This doesn't mean that we shouldn't have clear rules. My concern is that we have on the European level now, the problem is that, we need to properly enforce our AI Act. While we are under pressure from the other side of Atlantic to dismantle it. We need to properly enforce the DSA, the Digital Services Act, which is requiring companies, for example, to be transparent about the algorithms. And we haven't been doing it properly, and we are, as a European Union, under blackmail from the US to dismantle it. And this is where I think it's time for Europe to stand up and be counted. We need to stand our ground for our own sake, because those who are saying loudly, oh, you are against the freedom of expression, are now doing exactly that. They are banning or pushing comedians away from airways. They're trying to suppress freedom of expression. That's what you see. That's the old recipe. So, yeah, we don't have to get stronger.
So let me just quickly, you mentioned something, Martin, about the need for Europe to be able to essentially sort of develop its own AI and really have its own regime. We are also seeing this, obviously, in other parts of the world. The United States, you just mentioned how, regulations are falling there, which is great for companies, but it is not necessarily so great from a certain perspective in terms of being able to kind of regulate and have, keep an eye on or have guardrails around the nefarious purposes that AI could be used for. We're seeing development of a whole, AI regime in places like Saudi Arabia. China obviously is already, well developed. Looking ahead, what does it mean for the world to have these different centers in the world that are developing their own AI capabilities, playing by their own rules, with no kind of global framework? Where does this lead us, do you think?
Danger zone. And it doesn't mean that, we can afford not to do that. That's the sad reality. It's, the new nuclear proliferation and the new nuclear race in a different form. Mm-hmm. Not blatantly so physically destructive, but, you don't know what the future brings. Ultimately, I think, yes, it will be really important to try and make a big effort to come up to a global framework, yeah? To have certain limits for how, kind of, something which is going to put a framework out there in a global sphere. But this doesn't mean that we can afford, as a Europe, in the meantime, to do nothing. I think this is where, for me, the European AI doesn't mean that, Commission now gives the order and some institute will develop it. This is something that needs to be a product of a partnership across all the stakeholders, corporations, academia, civil society, importantly, because this is something which is nowhere else. No other place in the world has this richness that we have in Europe that we can use for having, well, the best and the grandest AI, on Orange Guy, I would say.
Evan,
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. First of all, As a European myself, I understand the need for European sovereignty in some of these issues completely. We've made a lot of effort to build sovereign products as Google for Europe. So we have this cloud offering in France, for example, which we announced a few months ago, which is with a partner in France. It's fully controlled by the French partner. It's Google technology, but it's essentially entirely sovereign. So I think there's a way to enable sovereignty without having to reinvent the wheel 100 times, and we're very focused on that. But to Martin's other point, I think it's really important for us to find a way to work together across companies and regulators and governments and academia in the Western democratic sphere. Because if we don't do that, we're just not going to be able to geopolitically succeed. It's not always easy in the circumstances, but I think it's going to be critical for our collective future to find ways to work together.
Just to comment on when you mentioned, yes, I agree, but for me, sadly, and I'm really sad seeing what's going on in the US, means more working with Canada, working with Australia, and really countries which, so to say, take us as a fair partners and don't try to impose their will on us.
Mm-hmm. We're going to open it up to the audience for questions very shortly, and I understand that the youth group has some questions that they'd like to ask, so if people could get them ready and raise your hands so that we can call on you. It is a little hard to see from here. But before we go to your questions, I did want to ask, I mean, we could talk for a very long time about all of the threats that AI poses. And the reason I think people tend to talk about threats is because we see all sorts of things happening, whether it's, somebody getting a text on their phone saying urgent, contact your bank because something is happening and really it's somebody trying to get your money, or whether it's, videos on TikTok or any other platform that are so easily formed and manipulated thanks to AI that deliver, toxic messages. I mean, it's practically inescapable. But at the same time, AI is useful for a number of things. And one of the things I just was hoping that both of you could just give a very quick example of, we're here at the Democracy Forum. How has AI, the development of AI, actually been useful in terms of helping with democracy, whether it be gathering data, getting voices? Just give a couple of examples that hopefully will give us some hope.
You want me to start?
Yeah.
I'll give you a few examples where AI is making the world safer and therefore enabling democracy. First of all, in cyber defense, essentially the job of a cybersecurity defender is to find needles in haystacks. Find the one access to your network that's malicious, the one server that has a vulnerability. AI is great at that. And we're seeing huge productivity improvements, huge improvements in our ability to find and address threats thanks to AI. Secondly, in software vulnerabilities, if you're not familiar, essentially think of them as holes in software or errors in software that allow attackers to come in. This is the biggest enabler of cyber attacks in the world. 60% of cyber attacks are based on vulnerabilities. And we've developed technology that finds and fixes vulnerabilities automatically using AI. And we found several real-world vulnerabilities. We've disclosed them to the developers. We've had them fixed in open source software. In scams, if you use Gmail, we block 99.9% of spam email and phishing and so on, thanks to AI. We do something very similar on Android for your messages. And so I think there are many ways in which AI will make the world safer. I'm optimistic that despite the threats, we'll ultimately get to a place where entire classes of threats to the world will be eliminated thanks to AI. But it'll be a bumpy road from here to there. Mm-hmm. And it won't happen automatically, and we have to invest and take it seriously and get to that world.
Martin, do you have one quick example?
I'm always struggling with good examples. Not just on this.
Surprise.
Now, I agree with you that one of the things is like in terms of the security, it's about moving landscape. So yes, when before it was about the physical people looking for the zero-day exploits in your software, now both sides are deploying AI to find them, and it's a race. So
an arms race.
you can
Absolutely.
say that, okay, it helped, but the other side is faster. So it's helping. It basically, for me, it's not about this is great, it helps. It's about that the whole environment in which we operate these things has changed, and that it's important to realize that, yes, we cannot ignore that the, so to say, the bad side has moved and be complacent. So both sides have to be up to date to try to address the challenges.
Yeah.
In democracy, though, I think this is where I think the way and we can try to utilize AI better is enabling the strengths of the civil society and kind of peer-to-peer communication.
Yeah.
I'm still concerned about the quality of the large language models in terms of interpretation. But with the growing knowledge, the potential is there, enabling really amazing leaps in the communication between the different languages.
So,
yeah, sorry,
right.
time, yeah.
With that, let me open. We have time for probably one question, I guess, from our young leaders. If you could hand them a microphone, it's pretty hard to see.
All right. Hello, I'm Tanisha. I'm from Oberlin College. My question is, on the note of a potential collaboration between tech companies and governments, how do you think that your citizens and consumers will react to this, and how would you respond to them?
Is that for you? Is that for me? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
For me, it's about the fact that actually the governments have been working with the companies since ever. The challenge is we have to make sure that the people are involved, that the civil society is involved, not to make it exclusive partnership, so to say, because only that way we can build the trust.
I think that's right. The other thing I would say is we want to make sure that when you try to regulate a field, you're regulating those who will be subject to that enforcement, to your point earlier. You're not regulating the bad guys from geopolitical jurisdictions where you're not going to be able to enforce. And so ultimately you end up regulating the good guys, not the bad guys. So we just have to make sure, as we do this, we're mindful of the end product of what we're collectively achieving.
Great. Well, thank you to you both. I mean, this debate could actually go on for a much longer time, and it's really hard to, even try to get, scratch the surface of answers in just half an hour. But you both have done a great job of doing that. And so I want to thank you for being here and thank all of you for participating in this panel. And please stick around. For our next panel, I want to welcome up to the stage now Lisa Witter of the Better Politics Foundation.